Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's session entitled Utilization of Waste Tracing in COVID-19. My name is Steve Glazner. I'm APA's Director of Knowledge Management, and I'll be your moderator for today's program. Note that we are recording this session and will post all symposium recordings after the event concludes. They'll be available for viewing by all attendees through January 22. So if you missed anything, especially the concurrent sessions going on, you'll be able to come back and view those or review ones that you have seen for more information. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you're not, please do so. Please put yourself in mute. I think that will make the session go a lot smoother. And please use the chat feature for questions to the speakers or comments throughout the program. We'll be monitoring the chat box throughout the presentation, and use this feature also if you're experiencing any technical difficulties with visual or audio. Our speakers today are Chris Kopak, who's past APA president, and Dr. Ian Pepper, both of the University of Arizona. And I will turn it over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Steve. Just want to make sure you can hear me okay.
I can.
Yep. Excellent. I wanted to go ahead and say thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to have opportunity to continue to talk about the great work that the University of Arizona is doing, and then also sharing that great work with our APA International Association. I also want to thank Ian Pepper. Ian, go ahead and introduce yourself real quick, Ian, and then I'll go ahead and start the presentation.
Okay, I'm Ian Pepper. I'm an environmental microbiologist, and I'm director of the Water and Energy Sustainable Technology Center at the University of Arizona, and in charge of our wastewater-based epidemiology at the UA.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's a pleasure that we're able to go ahead and chat again. We had presented at our housing association, International Housing Association, of the role of facilities management during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and how with our researchers, our faculty, our staff, and our students that the University of Arizona has now got up to stage 2, which allows us to have up to 50 students in our dorms. And that's, 50 students in our classrooms. We have roughly about 5,000 students in our dorms now, and the role facilities management plays. And so from our senior staff here in our facilities to our overall team of over 600 employees at the university, like a lot of our universities, facilities management, I can't think of any time in my career doing this almost 40 years, from the University of Michigan, contract services, and now at the University of Arizona for over 25 years, that facilities management has played such a critical role, but also that critical role of partnering as one team with everybody at our university. And whether it's our building managers, whether it's senior administration, whether it's faculty, and also all our researchers, we all have come together as one, sharing best practices, sharing our knowledge, and how do we go ahead and continue moving forward during this crazy era of pandemic, COVID pandemic, that I know a lot of folks, we all are getting tired of it, but we got to figure we still got a good year. The 2021, as a lot of areas throughout the country are busting loose, we're seeing just crazy high numbers. How has the University of Arizona used our three-legged stool, as I call it, of testing, tracing, treating, wastewater reviews, the metrics from the wastewater that Dr. Pepper will go over in detail, and then also our great information from our public health and working with our county, which we're in Pima County, to continue to have the University of Arizona up and running. And again, our facilities management team of 600 plus have played a critical role in allowing us to do that. Part of that role is using the knowledge of facilities management. As I've had the opportunity over the last several months, and we've been here on campus from day one, we brought in an incident command team in the early going. That team was headed up by the 17th Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Richard Carmona. He brought in several of his staff members and also then I had an opportunity as an embedded in-house facilities AVP to go ahead and assist as one of the logistics chiefs. And since that time, we've transitioned that group into an all U of A member, which I was asked to go ahead and lead as the incident commander. I've also gone ahead and brought in our facilities director of operations, Louis Rocha, and also Bruce Overland, our director of maintenance, and he's heading up our logistics. And so whether it's the logistics, the operation, we have the financial piece, legal piece, safety piece, and public relations information, everybody's coming together. But not only have we done that, we've streamlined the overall process, where we've also set up a team that is called the COVID-19 team. And it has 30 different members throughout our campus community, and a wide range from our athletics to our faculty, staff, Greek life, and others, compliance, human resources, legal, and such, that we can all make sure we're on the same page. And that's really, if we step back a little bit and say, what is the lessons learned over the last 8 to 9 months, is that communication has been never as important as it is now to make sure we're all on the same page on multiple fronts. And with that communication presentation today, we'll talk about how we've used wastewater testing to also drive our testing of our students. And testing of students, with 5,000 in our dorms, we have roughly over 20,000 faculty, staff, and students on campus right now. That's under the 60,000 that we usually have at the University of Arizona. We've also looked at all our Greek life houses, where we have 23 sororities and fraternities that are not university buildings. These are private corporations. But as everybody knows, those students are students of the U of A. And how do we go ahead and make sure we're doing the proper testing and monitoring the wastewater? So we've expanded our wastewater testing to include all our dorms, all our Greek houses, and off-campus apartments that are around the perimeter of the university. And Ian will be talking further on that. We've taken these sky-rise apartments, some cases 14, 15 stories, clustered 7 buildings at a time, and also we're testing the wastewater. And then the communication piece comes up through incident command. We have a testing group that meets every afternoon at 3 o'clock, that we're looking at the metrics. How are we doing in terms of our testing of our students? We're looking at our information in the evening, where the daily briefing that we provide our president of our university, anywhere from 8 to 11 o'clock at night. We have a number of folks who are giving great information in that dashboard. We review it, and then we use that to help us make solid decisions as we're meeting through an incident command team on a daily basis and briefing the president of the university along with the provost and others multiple times throughout the week, so we can make sure that we're catching any issues. And to give you a little brief, when we start looking at the role of facilities management, the role of the team as the whole, we've always said the team. And that's what we have here at the University of Arizona. Our facilities department, we have prided ourselves of a diverse group, always working for the common good of the university. Well, that concept of the team has expanded to everybody at the university working as one. Right now, we're in the process of testing all our students, like majority of universities and colleges throughout the country, that they will go online right after Thanksgiving to finish up the first semester. We're doing that right now, and we're happy to say our numbers are not showing large increases. Now, if we step back to August when the students moved back in, we tested every student, 5,000 students, before they moved into the dorms. And then what happened, within a matter of 2 weeks, the numbers just exploded. We were pushing the maximum amount at our isolation dorms, where we had 4, almost 600 of those rooms were filled up. We've looked at hotels around the perimeter of campus where we have partnerships where we could go ahead and expand. We currently only have 11 students in our isolation dorms. And that's been a week and a half of testing now before Thanksgiving. But like all of us, we're anticipating, unfortunately, as the weather gets cooler, out in Arizona, it's beautiful, but I know how Michigan is, where I'm from originally, where everybody starts coming inside, respiratory challenges, and the COVID challenge is hitting us hard. If I look at facilities' role during this entire pandemic, and as we continue playing a critical role. First, we set up a germ buster team, as I affectionately call them. We trained all our staff in strict isolation procedures. We made sure they had the proper personal protective equipment, the goggles, the N95s, the full suits. And if I look back up to date, we've had over positive or presumed positive of over 220 cases of COVID on campus. None in our classrooms, but we'd have them into offices and such. And the majority of those cases have come from outside of campus. A funeral, a family gathering, a wedding, where they brought it into campus. We were able to contact trace, minimize it, and we have a system of 24/7 to respond to those areas. And the slide here is our custodial staff who've been trained with all the personal protective equipment and taking care of the COVID cleanups. In the early going, as our dorms were, our students in early March, they were on spring break when everything was busting loose. We pivoted, as majority of universities and colleges did, to an all online basis within a week and a half. We never totally closed our university. We kept our research labs open. We're a world-renowned research university. We kept our research labs open, and what we've seen from where it went down to 200 of the labs, we now are at 97% of all our research labs up and running. And so whether it was setting up our hand sanitizing stations, whether it was training our staff, whether it was putting signage throughout all our campus buildings, facilities management played a critical role. The slide we have here looks at our dorms. As our dorms were being consolidated, facilities management assisted in the cleanup, following the proper personal protective equipment, and cleaning dorms up, as we thought we were going to be moving a lot of health professionals into our dorms. Fortunately, we didn't have to, and hopefully we won't have to do anything with what's taking place right now with the high numbers. Campus reentry, as we look at that, as you can see, sneeze guards, almost 2,000. 2,000 sneeze guards. Our carpenter shop has turned into a sneeze guards factory. We converted our computerized cabinet making machine into a sneeze guard factory where we're producing hundreds and hundreds of sneeze guards, not only for our main campus. We broke the main campus into 10 zones with our facilities management project managers assigned to each zone, working with the building managers. We looked at the city of Tucson and the entire state of Arizona. That was to go ahead and make sure we had the signage put in all our buildings, over 4,000 signs, wall-mounted hand sanitizers, touch-free paper towel dispensers. We're making sure where there was touch points, we were addressing those issues. And as I mentioned, we have it in place with the 4 different groups along with our testing, tracing, and treating team, which meets routinely. They're testing the students, faculty, and staff, whether it's antibody testing, whether it's antigen testing or PCR testing, and now we'll be rolling out the saline gargle testing that will roll out as of December 7th. We also then have our public health faculty experts in dealing with pandemics, where we meet on a weekly basis. We meet with the county, and then we have Dr. Ian Pepper, world-renowned Dr. Ian Pepper, wastewater testing, and how does that play a role in minimizing the spread of COVID-19? So Dr. Pepper, it's all yours.
Can I share screen now?
Yes, you can.
Says I cannot share screen while the other participant is sharing.
I just took it off.
Okay. And what we want is screen 1. You seeing everything?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about wastewater-based epidemiology, work that we've done at the West Center. And what I'll do is, first of all, go through the fundamental concepts of WBE, as we call it, then tell you what we did early on in the pandemic, then tell you what we did with campus reentry, and finish with some really exciting new stuff that we're now progressing towards. So WBE, we used to call it sewage surveillance or even sewage effluent testing, but now we've got this rather elegant name, wastewater-based epidemiology. And the concept is that it relies on testing the wastewater from a given community for the presence of a particular virus. So this is a very efficient way of monitoring, and it answers the questions, is the virus in the community? Is there a pandemic? And if it is in the wastewater, if the virus is in the community, the concentration of the virus gives an indication of the severity of the pandemic. So for coronavirus, we have infected individuals who shed the virus in feces, which then enters wastewater. So the shedding actually starts almost immediately upon someone becoming infected. And importantly, this occurs up to 7 days prior to visible symptoms. So I'll come back to that.
Ian, if you can pause for 1 sec, are you able to blow your whole screen up? They're seeing the slide deck also.
It looks blown up on mine. What are you seeing?
We're seeing 2 slides.
I don't know how to get out of that. Can you get a full screen with yours?
Let's try that, Ian. So stop sharing on yours, Ian.
I did.
And there you go. And Steve, just double checking, do you have the full screen on yours?
I'm just seeing the slides or the tiles of everybody who's on. So I think you need to share the screen again.
How's that?
I'm not seeing it yet.
So I'm seeing the whole screen on my end, Steve.
Do you did you share the screen?
Hang on 1 second. Share screen. Yeah, we might have to go to yours, Ian. I'm not.
All right, let me. Okay, stop sharing.
Yep.
And let me try this one. How's that look?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, good.
I think if you do the slideshow and
What concept for coronavirus?
well, I'm seeing the your opening page.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get out of that. It won't go to slideshow for me.
Ian, maybe stop sharing one more time. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick.
It's great technology when it works.
Steve, how about that?
Yeah, well, it just went back. I
We can
saw
go
it.
full. So you'll have to run it, Chris.
That's good. Okay, Ian, we're on rapidly growing discipline.
Okay, so it answers that question of is the virus in the community, and to what extent is the virus in the community? Next one. So for coronavirus, we have individuals that shed the virus, and I think this is where we were. The shedding occurs up to 7 days prior to visible symptoms, which becomes very important. It's at a maximum at the onset of symptoms, and it also continues 2 to 4 weeks after the disappearance of symptoms. So next one. So the benefits are, first of all, that one test monitors a defined community. And if it's a wastewater treatment plant, like the local wastewater treatment plant here in Tucson, Agua Nueva, that's 350,000 people. Or if it's a student dome with 300 students in it, that is the defined community. And again, one test will monitor that whole community. So we also know that it's highly sensitive from some work done with poliovirus earlier, in which you can detect one infection in 10,000 individuals. The next bullet is really important. It gives the total virus load shed into wastewater, including viruses from people that are symptomatic or asymptomatic. And again, because we see it in wastewater prior to people developing symptoms, it's a leading indicator. So you're familiar with the progression of case count, hospitalization, deaths. Well, wastewater is on the other end of that. That's the first thing that tells you you have a problem with the virus. Next one.
Ian, question though. You mentioned polio.
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
20 years ago. Interestingly, that was done 20 years ago. So wastewater-based epidemiology has been around for 20 years. But interestingly, during that 20 years, virtually nothing was done. And so although it's been around 20 years, WBE is still a very young discipline. And it's become a discipline, and I'm sure that down the road, students will be getting degrees in wastewater-based epidemiology.
And with our Pima County, with the detection of the wastewater, what are you seeing now versus there was a point in time the numbers went down to 0? What are you seeing as you're checking the county wastewater?
Now it's up again. It goes up and down. So, for example, you're right. We were getting non-detects for a while. Then we had Halloween, and a week after Halloween, the wastewater went positive, and it's positive at the moment. Not too bad, but it's certainly, we are detecting it at the moment. So some other uses of WBE, it's very useful for detecting the onset of the pandemic. So if you're testing the wastewater and 1 week it's negative, and then the next week it's positive, that's the beginning of, or in our case now, the return of the pandemic. And you can also use it to determine whether or not a community could or should return to work. And I'll show you some of that in a few minutes. And we can also use it to look at the success of interventions, such as using a mask or social distancing. And this is the very exciting part that I'll come to at the end of the presentation. We're developing models that allow us to look at the correlation between the virus concentration and the number of total clinical cases. And this allows for future predictions of the number of infections, including future hotspots. So I'll get to that.
Ian, I was talking last night with some folks who construct buildings. Do we see our buildings being constructed differently to address future pandemics and maybe easier access so we can monitor wastewater?
Yeah,
or other items?
That's exactly what's happening. And in fact, I got a pre-proposal into National Science Foundation based on how to cope with future pandemics, including predicting future pandemics. And one of those things is novel ways of engineering buildings, so that if you've got a high-rise building with 15 stories, can you compartmentalize the wastewater from each one of those floors so that you can more precisely pinpoint where you have cases? So really the fundamental advantage of wastewater testing is that it allows you to target where you should be testing with your clinical tests. The problem with clinical data at the moment, and we're getting communications from people all over the country, and some universities have spent millions and millions of dollars just doing clinical data. The problem fundamentally is the second bullet there. You test someone on a Monday and they're negative. Well, what about the Tuesday? So unless you're willing to test everyone every other day, it really doesn't pay to just do blanket clinical testing. Targeted clinical testing is what you should be looking for. And there's some other issues in terms of the time it takes to get the clinical data, and also false negative and false positives. Next one, Chris. So a little bit on COVID. I think you're familiar with this. I've got there the symptoms that are common, which are usually mild, uncommon, and rare. And perhaps the scariest symptom there is the very bottom, the so-called long haulers. And these are people that are getting infected and are still having symptoms months later, including neurological issues. So that is very, very scary. And people are now realizing that when you get infected with the virus, it can actually infect all of the organs in your body. Next one. So, and I'll come back to this later too, 70 to 80% people have only mild symptoms or are asymptomatic. And you see in brackets there, we think. Well, I now have data. I'll tell you how much it is later in the presentation. So currently, when people give you mortality rates, they really don't know because they never know the total number of infections. They just know the number of reported cases. And this bullet also is suspect. Young individuals are infected less frequently. It seems that we're now detecting it in young individuals more frequently, but usually mild symptoms. Look at this, the US, we're number one. How about that? The most cases and the most cases per capita. Next one, Chris. This is an interesting slide that puts COVID-19 in perspective. So this is the number of deaths from other pandemics and wars in the US. And you can see the winner there is HIV/AIDS, 700,000 deaths. And then the 1918 Spanish flu. And you can see an estimate there projected for COVID of about 400,000 deaths by January 2021. Hopefully that doesn't happen, and you can see there World War II, the Vietnam conflict, and you look at 9/11, which was huge at the time, and of course it's just a blip on the radar on this chart. So here's a cartoon of what we do with WBE. You have people who are infected in the community. They excrete the virus. It goes to the wastewater treatment plant. We sample the wastewater. We then do sample prep, nucleic acid extraction, quantitative PCR. We detect the virus and actually get a quantitative number of gene copies of the virus. Next one. So what do we actually do? Well, when the virus started to began very early in March, we made a big decision, and that was to put on the West website an offer to test wastewater samples anywhere in the nation for a fee to cover takers, and boy, did we get some takers. So we analyzed actually over 350 samples everywhere from LA to New York to Seattle to Jacksonville. Frequently, the wastewater samples were positive. Interestingly, after secondary treatment, they were always negative. So that was a good thing. We'd also collect metadata in terms of, where do you, the date, time, location, whether it was raw or treated sewage. And importantly, the wastewater treatment plant service area, meaning the number of people that are excreting feces into the wastewater that all goes to the particular wastewater treatment plant. And then if we have number of cases, we can get that from county health, number of deaths, and ultimately we're looking for correlations of cases and deaths with the virus concentration in the wastewater. So this was some work done in Amsterdam. The orange line is really the virus target for PCR, and the gray line is reported COVID hospitalization. So you can see there's a very nice correlation there. We've done similar things. Go to the next one. This is a cartoon of the virus. You see the crescent shapes there. And it's just showing the various PCR targets developed by the World Health Organization and Centers for Disease Control. We actually use the CDC targets. Next one. And this is a complicated slide, so let me simplify it. Just concentrate, first of all, on figure 1 and look at the blue line and the blue bar graphs. The blue line is the number of cases. The bar graph histogram are the wastewater concentrations. And so you see a nice correlation there between the number of cases and the virus concentration. And in fact, at the end, from the second bar from the left, from the right to the last bar on the right, that's showing you the effect of the stay-at-home order introduced into Arizona in April, May. In figure 2, you see the opposite. Now look at the blue line, and the blue bar is at the N1 target, the yellow is another virus target, N2, but you see a nice correlation between, again, the number of cases and the virus concentration. And in fact, what you're looking at there is the effect from the left, when we started to open up Arizona and the number of cases increased. So wastewater is very sensitive. It picks up stay-at-home orders. It picks up opening up orders at the state level. Next one. So that's what this slide says. When the stay-at-home happened, about 2 to 4 weeks later, the virus concentrations and the case count decrease. The reverse happens if you reopen the economy. And interestingly, after the 3 major holidays, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, we could add to that Halloween. A week after each holiday, you see the virus concentrations increase, and about 2 weeks after each holiday, you see the case count increase. So we can get nice correlations. There's an R factor there of 0.92. And go to the next one, Chris, and show these correlations. So the model data is, in fact, correlates with the observed data and with total infections and new cases. So this is really encouraging. Next one. So we learned an awful lot during testing from March through, actually through current time, on wastewater-based epidemiology, and we were actually earlier than almost anyone in the country. So we're ahead of the game in terms of learning about wastewater-based epidemiology. Here's the 7 teams that Chris was talking about that were actually developed beginning of June and met every week. So COVID testing, antibody testing, contact tracing, isolation, data management, thermometry, and wastewater-based epidemiology. And my task then was to head up the team that was going to monitor the university when the students returned. These were the initial dorms that we tested. You can see the one in caps there, the lichens, because that was the hole where we got our first positive. Next one. So you may wonder, well, how do you get wastewater from dorms? Well, the answer's obvious, isn't it? You get it from manholes. And I should warn you that if you attempt to do this, those manhole covers are extremely heavy, and you better have someone in there doing that that's pretty husky that can remove those manhole covers. And we made a very important decision, and that was to monitor dorms where we had one dorm with a single sewer, so we could collect samples of wastewater specific to a given dorm. And that meant we now knew the virus concentration in a defined community, the community within that specific dorm. Next one. And again, the cartoon, people get infected, virus shedding, wastewater sampling, detection by a PCR. But here's the additional piece. Now, because of the 7 teams that we had, we also have the ability to do clinical testing. And so what the wastewater testing was allowing us to do was to target the clinical testing specifically where you knew there was going to be infections. So if you've got 20 odd dorms on campus and 22 of them are negative via wastewater and 1 is positive, then you concentrate your clinical testing on that 1 dorm where the wastewater was positive. And I'll show you a case study of that. This was Likens Hall, and from left to right is a timeline. So middle of August, the students are returning. As Chris mentioned, they were all tested and had to be negative before they were allowed into the dorms. So the wastewater, WW, was negative right after students started returning. Most of the students returned August 21. August 24th, classes began. August 25, we got our first positive hit. And as Chris will attest, even though we'd been planning for this event, we knew it would happen all summer long. There was extreme excitement, to say the least. That day when we got the positive, there was an emergency task force meeting that night. I was woken up 11 o'clock at night, not by Chris, but by President Robbins, and the discussion entailed as to what we were going to do. And 2 critical decisions were made. One was that we would go back and take additional wastewater samples to make sure that they were positive. But equally, or even more importantly, the decision was made to test all of the students in that dorm that was positive. So that happened on the 25th, and we got multiple samples there that were positive. And by the clinical testing, 2 students were detected as in being infected and were removed and put in isolation. And more importantly, those 2 students were actually asymptomatic. So if we had not done the wastewater testing, they would have been free to roam around campus for several days additionally, potentially spreading the virus. So what the wastewater testing was doing for us was not eliminating exponential spread, but reducing it. And you can see there the scenario continues, and as student was returned from isolation, still shedding. Remember, I said they continue to shed. And we found another person on August 29th. Let me cut to the chase and say that since then, we've had over 100 cases of positive wastewater tests, and 89% of the time that is correlated with clinical cases being discovered in the dorm within 1 to 2 days of the positive wastewater test. So it's really been effective in reducing exponential spread. And I think that's the critical reason why the U of A has been successful in remaining open, whereas many universities, as you know, nationally, have been forced to shut down. Next one, Chris. So this really just said that I need to update this slide. We're now in, what, about the 13th week of the semester? We almost made it to Thanksgiving. We've remained open, and infections in the dorms down to 0 during this time. We also had an increase in the middle of the semester, and President Robbins put in a shelter-in-place order, and we could see that, reflected in the virus concentrations, with the concentrations decreasing 1 or 2 weeks after that shelter-in-place. So it really is very sensitive. False positives are rare. If the virus is in the wastewater, it pretty much means someone is infected. You can get false negatives due to low shedding rates of an infected individual, and also you can get PCR inhibition by metals or organics. But the success rate of 89%, I think, is pretty staggering. You may recall back in early September, the media frenzy. We had broadcasts on all the major networks, publications in the Atlantic, Politico, over 300 media hits. Those are still continuing today. We're also getting calls from all over the country, from universities that want to institute wastewater-based epidemiology, and from county health officials. And so we're inundated, to be honest with you, with trying to keep up with the requests for information. Next one. This is kind of cool. Some of the national headlines were great. And of course, the one I love there is on the left in the middle, how the University of Arizona used number 2 to solve its number 1 problem, the coronavirus. So it was quite a ride over these past few months. Next one, Chris. So some of the things we've learned during all of this, we know that grab samples are sufficient. You don't need to do composite sampling. And we showed that by taking multiple samples over a time period and showing similar virus concentrations in all of the samples, illustrating that the virus actually disperses and remains within the wastewater and the sewer, certainly for 24 hours. We can identify as few as 2 infected students in 300. We catch them early. We see responses to the major holidays and the response to interventions. Next one. So I think this might be the last slide, but it's a very important one. So the latest thing we've been doing is using that equation at the top there, theoretical number of infected people. And you can predict that from that equation, the sewage concentration, the wastewater flow rate, the amount of feces, and the fecal shedding rate. And the big unknown in that equation was the shedding rate. However, from the work we did with the student dorms, we knew the number of cases. When we got a positive wastewater and they test everyone in the dorm, we know exactly how many people are infected, including the asymptomatic people. And so we then use the number of cases to back calculate the shedding rate. And interestingly, it came out at a constant number for all 18 dorms. So now what we're doing is beginning to think about collecting wastewater from discrete parts of the city, working within zip codes, and predicting the theoretical number of infected people that are going to, or the number that are going to be infected within a week in that zip code. And so there's the potential then for interacting with county health and giving them information, telling them where within the city the next hotspot is going to be. So that has tremendous implications. And you can also do the same thing, monitoring wastewater from high-risk buildings like nursing homes or prisons. So that's where we're going, and we think this is very exciting because, you know, when you get right down to it, what are we doing? Oh, just saving people's lives. So the wastewater-based epidemiology has been incredibly successful. And this was a catchphrase that I started using early on. And it was a catchphrase, but now I truly believe this. Poop never lies. It can tell you a lot about yourself, and it can tell you a lot about your community. And I think that's it, Chris.
There's a couple questions, Ian, and then we can go to the chat. And thank you again for sharing all the knowledge. It's been a pleasure getting to know you over the last several months. You're measuring the feces. What about urine? Can you detect it just in urine?
Yes, you can. In fact, I've got a paper I can send you on it, Chris.
Okay. And we'll be sending it to our APA members then, because would that be an even easier way to test urine samples?
Well, yes and no, and that you can detect the virus in urine, but it's apparently at lower concentrations than the feces, and that would make sense because we know viruses like to partition to solid phase, and so the concentrations are much higher in the feces than they are in the urine, but it all contributes.
And the percentage of accuracy on the urine detection versus the feces?
That I couldn't tell you. We have not done that analysis.
I'm sure our members are wondering, what is the cost? And can you give us a breakdown of what does that cost? What is made up to perform services like this?
Well, I'll tell you two things, and the second part is really good news. So when we were doing that testing of the wastewater treatment plants from all over the country, I simply added up all of the expenditures that I had made for reagents and disposable plastics and everything else over a 6-month period, and then added in labor and came up with, at that time, a cost of $300 to $350 per test. Now, the good news is there is tremendous innovation going on. I was contacted last week by a company that has developed a kit for wastewater testing, and they're very excited about it. And they're going to give us 100 of these kits to evaluate them for them. We'll compare the kit versus the standard procedure we're using. The good news about the kit is, according to the company, the whole process for sample preparation takes an hour and a half, whereas for us currently it's taking 4 hours. So that's a huge savings of time. And the cost of the kit is $30. So $30 a test. And that's cheaper than it's much cheaper in terms of reagent and disposables than what it's costing us. So that's really good news. And another company also contacted me, so I don't know what I'm going to do. So all these people want to have their products tested. I can also just mention to people that we have a lot of other tremendous research going on at the West Center. My colleague, Dr. Gerber, is working with innovative disinfectants, long-lasting disinfectants. He's also being contacted by Boeing. So the attempts there are to make sure it's safe to fly. Now we're getting car manufacturers like Jeep interested in, how do they disinfect cars so that everything's taking on a life of its own. We've also done bioaerosol work, and we're now working, growing SARS-CoV-2, the actual virus, in Bio5 and a biosafety level 3. And we're going to be trying to isolate the virus from the sewage, infectious virus. No one has done that yet, but we think we have a good shot at that by analyzing the sewage from the wastewater domes, which tend to have less chemicals and organics than, say, the wastewater from a wastewater treatment plant. So you're going to see a lot of innovation coming over this coming year.
We have a lot of questions, Ian. Bill Bagnell is asking, what frequency do you collect the grab samples?
Great question. And the answer is we've come to the conclusion every other day. And the reason why I say that is, let's say you take a wastewater sample and you get a hit, you're positive. So you need to allow then time to see if that virus concentration is going to increase, decrease, or stay the same. And so where you're going with that, by the number of infections in the community that you're looking at. So every other day is our answer.
And then he has a couple other follow-up questions. Do you run the PCR the same day?
Yes, we do. Currently, we get the samples at 8:30 in the morning. We take the flow rate. Most students are probably using the bathroom first thing in the morning. The samples then come back to the West Center by about 10. We do sample prep, nucleic acid extraction, and PCR, and we have the answers by about 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the evening, the same day. And if we use that kit, it'll be even quicker.
And how about the grab samples? What volume are you collecting in the grab samples?
Just 1 liter.
And then are you keeping that on ice during the collection process before?
Yes, you do keep it on ice, but there are data that shows that on ice, you can keep the sample for several weeks to a few months. If you do -20, you can store the sample for 3 years. And if you do -80, you can store it for 7 years. So you're fine with putting it on ice just for the short run back to the lab.
And so -80, it would be positive for how many years? 7?
7 years, yeah. But I mean, most people, we only do that for research purposes.
Would that be infectious to others then if they came in contact with that?
Well, that's, again, no one has isolated infectious virus from sewage, but potentially, so you have to be careful.
And what about PPEs that your staff are using when they're collecting?
We use, for the wastewater work, we're in biosafety level 2, which means we're doing all the work inside of a biosafety cabinet, and of course the appropriate masks and clothing. So
one of the questions,
and I can tell you, interestingly, because we were doing essential research at West, when the kind of stay-at-home order went into the university in March, we were not staying at home, and we've been going into West every day since then. And that's 20, 25 people coming into the West Center every day. And of course, we're very strict about following CDC guidelines. And to date, we haven't had a single infection, which tells me that if you follow the rules, you'll be fine.
and are they wearing the N95s?
No, not all the time. No, just and that's the other thing I've come to realize, that like N95 is the top of the line, but any mask is certainly better than none, and appears to be very effective, because if it wasn't, one would have thought that surely, from March to November, 25 people, you think, well, how could someone not get infected? And of course, we're pretty careful, and West is probably one of the most disinfected buildings you're ever going to find, because we've been dealing with human pathogenic virus for many years, including SARS virus back in 2009 and the Ebola virus a few years ago. So
Now, one of the questions could be from our members who are universities throughout the country is the role of FM. And I know our facilities management department has partnered with you in the very beginning because we needed to isolate the sewer systems.
You have to understand that when we were looking at trying to get dorms with a single sewer line to them, we trudged across campus, and I was fortunate to have a member of facilities management that had been with the university for 30 odd years, and he seemed to know where every pipe on campus was. Because you have to understand that the sewage system on the University of Arizona campus was built in an ad hoc manner over a 40 to 50 year period, and at times adapting it from residential areas. So there's no rhyme, no reason as to where the sewer lines go. So without the help of facilities management, just couldn't have done the project.
And I'd have to say too, the partnership with our local county
Yes.
sewer folks,
Yeah.
with where we meet on a quarterly basis, even before pandemic, we would meet for planning purposes of what is the discharge coming off our campus, what are future planning of capital buildings, so they would have a good understanding of what's taking place in terms of the large amount of sewage coming off. We got go ahead, Ian.
See, the other thing that's interesting is at the start of the fall semester, community leaders were concerned that students would be coming back to Tucson and spreading infections into the community. Well, now I'm of the opinion that the reverse is happening. The number of cases on campus is really very low relative to the number of cases in the community. I don't have the most recent counts. I don't know if you have them, Chris, but certainly in the dorms, I'm amazed at how successful the combination of the wastewater testing with the clinical testing has been in just really keeping the number of infections either down, close to zero for quite some time there this semester.
That actually goes to another question we got from Bill Bagnell about our incident command. And so where we're getting a briefing every evening, that briefing usually will get sent to me as the incident commander anywhere between 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. We're reviewing it. We get it that late because we're waiting for the data to come in from all the testing that took place during the day.
The
And this
clinical
is
testing.
Exactly. And this is testing that's from our campus health, where they're testing any students who may be symptomatic, to random testing that if Ian's wastewater testing has shown us to be concerns on Ian, I believe it's a 1, 2, 3, and a 4 level that
Yeah,
we're looking at.
we haven't talked about that
Maybe you
yet.
can comment on that. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, so interestingly, one of the big questions is, what do you do when you get a positive hit in the wastewater? And you have to be careful. So when we did all the wastewater treatment plant samples, March through right now, all those tests, I interpreted the data for each one of those tests. So I became very familiar with the concentrations of virus in the wastewater relative to the number of cases in the community. So based on that, we developed like what is now 5 levels of concern: 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 0 is a non-detect, no concern. Level 4 is the highest level of virus, greater than 10 to the 7. Test everyone. Level 1 is the interesting one. If you get trace amounts of the virus, what do? You certainly don't want to cause panic. So our recommendation was that for that level 1, you would have enhanced awareness, enhanced disinfecting, and of course, enhanced adherence to CDC guidelines. And then for levels 2 and 3, for level 2, which is a 10 to the 3, 10 to the 4 gene copies per liter, 20% random testing. And then level 3, we're recommending 40% random testing. So you can see there are these levels of concern. And again, you can see if you test sequentially over time, you can determine whether the levels are increasing or decreasing.
And Ian, that's a great point. And to your point right before this one too, the testing that's been taking place, it's not only the wastewater testing, we also have the clinical testing taking place in our campus health, symptomatic students. Those are students who may be on campus or off. That's including employees also, employees, faculty, and staff. And then we have the random testing and just scheduled testing where we may take a large building. Ian, we've done multiple dorms throughout the semester now since August, where we've stood up a testing site, and each time we're finding, several positives that we then can move into our isolation area. So it's been extremely positive.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed this, but the wastewater test results from yesterday, the private sector high-rise apartments, boy, they were the hotspots.
And that's the challenge. As we've continued expanding out our wastewater testing to properties that the university owned, we had total control. And now working with a private entity from the Greeks, which in the beginning, we had some challenges, but the Greeks, we've been meeting with them on a weekly basis in the evening on Wednesday, sharing best practices. As a matter of fact, today there was a presentation done to our president that the CDC has just come out recently and is using our program for our Greek life, our sororities and fraternities in containing the COVID virus as a best practice that they're going to be using throughout universities throughout the country. But Ian, you're absolutely right. Those high-rise apartments that are privately funded, that's the challenge. And we saw those numbers are hitting high. And so now we're saying, how do we partner with students who are in those? And matter of fact, as we look for our re-entry into our spring semester, as we call it, starting on January 13th, we will do testing a week beforehand. And if we have students who are in those apartments, any student who will come onto campus, it will be mandatory that they will be tested, whether you're in the dorms, whether you're in the apartments, whether you're at home, you're coming onto campus, it's mandatory. And if you do not, there's restrictions that will be put within your ability to continue classes. And so the whole idea, we need to contain the virus. We have another question here, some great questions. This is from James Brown. Does the virus propagate upstream in a fluid stream?
Do you mean replicate?
No,
the answer is no. There's no host.
Does it move? Does it travel back upstream? That, I think, could be another way to look at it.
So I didn't get into this, but when you may recall, I said that the day after we had the first positive in lichens, we took 5 samples. And those 5 samples were taken 5 minutes apart. The flow rate in the sewer was at least 30 gallons per minute. So over a half-hour period, you've had over 1,000 gallons of fluid pass through that sewer. And yet, when we analyzed the 5 samples, the virus concentrations were essentially identical, within 0.1 of a log of each other. And that validates some work that was also done a long time ago with poliovirus, in which after one flush with poliovirus, you could detect it 2 or 3 days after that flush. So the virus apparently disperses like a ping pong ball, bounces around. It's not removed by plug flow. So I'm not sure if that answers the question. It's telling you that it sticks around for a longer period of time than you might think.
I wonder if the question could be looked at too, Ian, that if we have a sewer system where we have multiple dorms going to a single point, we are able to isolate in some cases, but could you have the virus from one dorm sewer system spread upstream into the other dorm and give you a false positive that we have challenges within that building?
I think it would be exceedingly unlikely for the virus to kind of, move against the flow of the water.
Now another question has come up, and this is a great question. And this is from Bill also, Bill Bagnell. Great questions, Bill. And it's, what are the hurdles to get approval to testing at apartments and Greek life? And you're absolutely right. Ian, I'll talk about Greek life, but why don't you talk about the apartments, because we're still dealing with that one.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is the apartments, although they're private sector, the sewer lines are owned by Pima County Wastewater. And so since we have very good relations with Pima County Wastewater, we simply got permission to sample the the sewers. So they're county property.
Now you did have a challenge where I think some folks from those apartments were trying to shoo you off
That's
from
right.
the sewer system because it was bad business. We went and made sure we got the permits. We got official letters from our Pima County, and I believe all that is stopped. Is that right?
That is, and I think part of it was, although the message, remember there were communications between university officials and the private sector buildings, but those were probably at a high level, and I think it was someone in a lower position at the private sector building that came out and like didn't know what was going on.
So we've gotten that. We're in the process right now of having all our protocols in place for our high-rise apartments. We've just recently, over the last month, started with the large apartments off campus. We're also looking at apartments that are several miles away from campus, not doing the wastewater testing, but we're measuring the numbers. In that partnership with our county, on a weekly basis, we have a standing ICS meeting, incident command team meeting, with our county and other key professionals throughout our university and community. And so from our researchers to Terry Collins, who heads up the health for our Pima County Health Department for our Pima County, she's just been a great asset. And when in the early going, we were running into some challenges with our dorms, or excuse me, our fraternities and sororities. The university went on a shelter in place, as Ian mentioned. Shortly after school started, a couple weeks after school, our numbers were just skyrocketing. We did the shelter in place. We instituted a more aggressive wastewater for additional buildings, and we've just seen our numbers drop drastically. And as I said, as a date, we only have 11. And Ian, as of last night, as we're reviewing metrics, we had zero cases of COVID in the testing in our dorms. And that's a good 24 dorms that we have on campus. So
I would like to mention something, which is, I think kudos are due to President Robbins for initiating the plan of the 7 teams and putting tremendous resources in the hands of the 7 teams. I strongly believe that the University of Arizona was better prepared for campus reentry than any other university in the nation. And I think that's why we've been successful. And I think we've really established a model for other universities to follow. And that's part of the reason why we're getting tremendous interest. Everyone wants to know, how do you do it?
Ian, on that front, are you finding that, are you taking part in studies with other universities on the wastewater testing? Is someone coordinating that